I never thought I'd be writing something like this. Honestly, I still feel like I'm trying to convince myself it wasn't real, that I somehow misread what happened, that I imagined it or exaggerated it. But I didn't. I know I didn't. It started when my cousin Mia came to stay with us for a few weeks. She's 2 years younger than me. We grew up kind of like siblings, summer vacations together, birthdays, holidays. But as we got older, we drifted. Life happened. She moved out of state, I got married, and we didn't talk much beyond the occasional like on each other's social media posts. She reached out of the blue, said she needed a place to stay. Job interview in town, looking to move, didn't want to spend money on hotels. My wife said sure without hesitation. Mia showed up 2 days later with a backpack and a box of stuff. That first night felt like old times. We sat up late, catching up, laughing at dumb childhood stories, drinking wine while my wife went to bed early. Mia looked different than I remembered. Not just older, more confident. The kind of confidence that doesn't ask for permission. She walked around like the place already belonged to her. Not in a rude way, just comfortable. Too comfortable, maybe. She was always in gym shorts or one of those tank tops that barely covered anything. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, she's my cousin. I've seen her in worse. But something felt off. I couldn't name it. She'd compliment my cooking, laugh a little too long at my jokes, touch my arm when she talked to me. Just subtle stuff. Maybe she was just being friendly. I told myself not to read into it. My wife and I were going through a rough patch. She'd been working crazy hours, stressed out, barely talked when she got home. We'd argue about dumb stuff like dishes or grocery lists. We hadn't been intimate in months. Every night she came to bed late, turned away, and passed out before I could even try to say anything. I'd gotten used to it. That's the worst part. I stopped even expecting connection. I just assumed it wasn't there anymore. Mia noticed. One night she said something like, "You guys don't really talk, huh?" I just kind of laughed it off, said we're both tired. She didn't push. But after that, she started staying up later. Sometimes we'd sit on the couch and watch movies while my wife was asleep. Other times we'd just talk. She told me stuff she hadn't told anyone else. How she felt like she kept failing at everything. How she didn't know what she wanted to do with her life. How her last relationship ended because she didn't feel seen. It hit a nerve. I didn't say it, but I knew exactly what she meant. There was one night, I remember it too well, where we were sitting on the floor, backs against the couch, drinking the last of a bottle of red wine. She told me I was the only person who actually listened to her. Said I made her feel safe. She looked at me, really looked like she was waiting for something. I looked away. I should have said something then. Should have created space. Put up a wall. Instead, I asked if she wanted another drink. Little things started piling up. She'd leave the bathroom door open when she brushed her teeth. Walked around in a towel. Sat too close on the couch. I kept telling myself I was imagining things. That none of it meant anything. My wife didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did and didn't care. We barely spoke unless it was about bills or dinner. She came home late, eyes glued to her phone. When I mentioned that I thought Mia might be overstaying, she just shrugged and said, "She'll leave soon." But Mia wasn't acting like someone planning to leave. She bought groceries, cleaned the kitchen, did our laundry once, which felt too much. I told her she didn't have to, and she just smiled and said, "I wanted to." One morning, I came out of the shower and saw Mia in the hallway, in a tank top and nothing else. Just standing there like it was normal. I froze. She didn't. She smiled, said, "Oops," and walked into the guest room like nothing happened. That's when the dreams started. Vivid, detailed dreams. I'd wake up sweating, guilty, angry. I'd lie there next to my wife, hating myself. I hadn't done anything, but it felt like I had. I started avoiding Mia. Spent more time in the bedroom with the door closed. But she'd still find me. Knock and say, "Hey, want coffee?" Or come sit next to me while I worked, pretending she was just bored. I was getting sucked in, and I knew it. But there was a part of me that liked the attention. The part that felt invisible for too long. The part that missed being desired. Even if it was wrong. Especially because it was wrong. I never imagined myself as someone capable of crossing a line. I always thought I had strong morals, that I was loyal. But every day, that line moved a little more. First it was just talking. Then it was laughing too long, looking too long. Then it was imagining things I shouldn't. I stopped sleeping well. I kept replaying her voice in my head. Her laugh. The way she looked at me. I'd watch her out of the corner of my eye and feel ashamed. It wasn't like I was planning anything. I just didn't know how to stop whatever was happening. The guilt started bleeding into everything. I snapped at my wife over nothing. Avoided eye contact at dinner. I even started coming home later just so I wouldn't be alone with Mia. But it didn't matter. She always found a way to be near me. She wasn't subtle anymore. She'd sit on the armrest of my chair. Take food from my plate. One time she sat on my bed when my wife was out and said she wanted to watch something together like old times. I said no. I told her it wasn't appropriate. She didn't argue, just looked at me and said, "Okay," and left. But the damage was already done. I was in it now, whether I admitted it or not. I kept telling myself I could still walk away, that I hadn't done anything yet, that it was all just in my head. But I knew it was only a matter of time. The thing about temptation is that it never feels like temptation at first. It feels like comfort, like something you need. It's only after you give in that you realize it was a slow collapse, not a fall. And I was already collapsing. Quietly, carefully, without anyone noticing. Things didn't cool off after that night. I told her no. If anything, it made everything more intense, like I'd cracked open something she'd been holding back. She stopped pretending she wasn't flirting. Stopped hiding the way she looked at me, the way her voice shifted when we were alone. It wasn't playful anymore, it was direct, charged, deliberate. And I didn't stop her. It's hard to explain how something like this happens without sounding like you're trying to make excuses. I wasn't a victim. I didn't fight it. I rationalized every moment. Told myself I was just being kind, just being a good host. That it was harmless. I never touched her. That line still mattered to me, even if everything else was getting blurry. But I was lying to myself. We both knew what was happening. My wife was working longer hours, even started sleeping at her sister's on nights. She had early meetings near her office. She claimed it was just more efficient, easier than commuting. I didn't argue. I let her go. I didn't want her around anyway, not because I didn't love her, but because I couldn't handle pretending everything was normal while I was spiraling. Mia and I fell into a rhythm. Late nights, close conversations, laughter that felt a little too intimate. We shared stories about exes, embarrassing childhood secrets, deep insecurities. She made me feel seen again. And that became the most dangerous part, because once someone makes you feel understood in a way you've been starving for, it's almost impossible to pull away. She started sitting closer. She touched my knee when she laughed, let her head rest on my shoulder when she got tired. I never pushed her off. I didn't touch her back, not at first. But I didn't move away either. And not moving is still a choice. One night, I woke up to her knocking on my door. Quiet, almost hesitant. She said she couldn't sleep, that she had a nightmare. I didn't answer. I just lay there, pretending to be asleep, heart pounding in my chest like it was about to explode. She stood there for a minute, then walked away. The next morning, she acted like nothing happened. But the silence between us was heavier than ever. After that, the emotional boundaries vanished completely. She started texting me during the day, even when we were in the same house. Things like, "You looked really good this morning," or "I had a dream about you last night." I never replied directly, but I never told her to stop either. I'd just delete the messages, feel guilty for a while, and then wait for the next one. One afternoon, I was working from home and she came in, sat across from me, legs crossed, wearing one of my wife's old t-shirts. No bra, no shame. She said she liked how I looked when I was focused. Asked if I miss being touched. Said it so casually, like she was asking about the weather. I told her that wasn't appropriate. She just smiled, stood up, and left. That smile stayed with me all day. I couldn't talk to anyone about it. Who would believe me? Who could I even tell? without sounding insane or disgusting. She was my cousin. We shared a family. And yet, every part of my body reacted to her like she was someone I was supposed to want. It made me question everything: my morals, my identity, even my sanity. I convinced myself it was still salvageable, that it was just flirting, just words, that I hadn't actually done anything. But I had. I had emotionally checked out of my marriage and handed the keys to someone else. I stopped thinking of my wife as a partner and started seeing her as an obstacle, someone I had to lie to, manage, avoid. The worst part was, Mia knew exactly what she was doing. She watched me unravel and never once looked guilty. She'd compliment my cooking when my wife didn't. She remembered things I liked. She asked about my dreams, my stress, my childhood. Things my wife hadn't asked in years. She became the emotional center of my life before I even realized I'd shifted orbit. One night, we stayed up talking again. She was curled up in a blanket next to me, feet resting under my leg, like it was the most natural thing in the world. We weren't even drinking this time. She looked over and said, "You know you can tell me anything, right?" I didn't respond. She waited a second and then asked, "Do you ever regret getting married?" I said no, too quickly. She caught it. "Liar," she whispered and smiled. I didn't argue. That night, I dreamed about her again. But it wasn't sexual. We were just sitting together, laughing. And I woke up with tears in my eyes. That scared me more than any physical temptation ever could. The idea that I was starting to emotionally crave her the way I used to crave my wife when we were first dating, that I was falling into something real, not just physical, shook me to my core. I tried to create space again. Told her I needed to focus on work. Started going to bed earlier, locking the door. She didn't push. But the energy didn't go away. It just waited. Lingered. Every silence between us was filled with what we weren't saying. My wife noticed a shift. One night, she asked me if something was going on. Not with Mia, just in general. She said I seemed distant, cold. I told her I was just tired. She didn't believe me, but she didn't ask again. That's how far apart we'd drifted. We didn't even fight anymore. I kept telling myself this would end when Mia left, that I just had to hold on a little longer. But I also found myself dreading the idea of her leaving, of the house feeling empty, of going back to the silence between me and my wife. That terrified me, because it meant I wanted her here. I wanted her presence, her attention, her eyes on me. She made me feel needed, desired, alive. And I hated myself for it. It all felt so quiet, like no one else knew what was happening because nothing had physically happened. But emotionally, I had already gone so far I wasn't sure if I could find the way back. I started fantasizing about telling her, about saying it out loud, about crossing the line on purpose just to get it over with. Not because I wanted it to happen, but because the tension was unbearable. I wanted it to end one way or another. I just didn't know how to be the one to end it. Every day felt like a coin flip. Some days I convinced myself I was still a good person. Others, I felt like I'd already destroyed everything, and I was just waiting for the explosion to hit. And then came the night when everything shifted, when the silence finally broke. But that's another story. It happened on a Thursday. I remember the day because everything before it feels like build-up and everything after feels like consequence. My wife had left that morning to visit her mom for the weekend. She'd packed a bag without looking me in the eye, kissed me on the cheek like she was checking a box, and left without asking if I'd be okay alone. That was the kind of marriage we had at that point, silent assumptions, no real concern. Mia didn't say anything about it all day, but I could feel it in the air. She was quieter than usual, watched me more. There was this tension, this pressure building between us, like something was about to snap. And it did. We'd spent the day ignoring what we both knew. I worked. She cleaned. We barely spoke, but every time we passed each other, there was this heaviness. Like we were pretending not to feel what was clearly there. It started with her sitting next to me on the couch again. We didn't touch. We didn't talk for a while. We just sat there. She was scrolling on her phone, pretending to be distracted. I was staring at the screen, not seeing any of it. Then she leaned over, rested her head on my shoulder, and whispered, "I've wanted this for weeks."
I didn't respond.
My heart was pounding. My mouth went dry. She turned her face, close enough that I could feel her breath, and said, "Tell me to stop." I didn't. I should have. I could have. But I didn't. She kissed me. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't rushed. It was slow, deliberate, and completely devastating. I kissed her back. My hands moved without thinking, like they belonged to someone else. Everything I'd been telling myself for weeks, every line I thought I wouldn't cross, dissolved in that moment. It wasn't just lust. That would have made it easier to hate myself afterward. It was the way she looked at me like I was worth something. Like I hadn't been invisible. Like she saw every broken, ignored, rejected part of me and wanted it anyway. Clothes came off. Words stopped. Everything was skin and breath and hands and 1,000 unspoken things that had been building between us since the day she moved in. It wasn't rough or wild. It was quiet, focused, intentional. She knew exactly what she was doing.
So, did I.
After, she curled up beside me like it was nothing. Like we'd done it before. Like it was normal. I couldn't move. I just stared at the ceiling, heart racing, mind blank. There was no rush of regret, no dramatic panic, just this cold silence in my chest that told me I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. She asked if I was okay. I said I didn't know. She kissed my shoulder and said, "It's not the end of the world." And maybe to her it wasn't. But to me, it felt like I'd set fire to everything familiar. The guilt hit later. Not instantly. It snuck in hours after she fell asleep beside me. I got out of bed, sat in the bathroom, and stared at myself in the mirror. I didn't recognize the person looking back. I thought about calling my wife, telling her everything, confessing, burning it all down before the lies had a chance to multiply. But I didn't. I went back to bed, lay next to my cousin, and tried to breathe. The next morning, we didn't talk about it. She acted normal, asked if I wanted coffee, sat at the kitchen table like we hadn't just shattered the rules of everything. I didn't know how to respond. I nodded,
Took the coffee. Said thanks.
my hands were shaking, but I don't think she noticed. Everything after that was a blur of avoidance. I tried to act like it hadn't happened, but my body remembered. My mind wouldn't shut up. She started getting bolder, touching me more, kissing me when no one was around. I didn't stop her. I didn't encourage it either. I just froze every single time, caught between shame and desire. I told myself it was a one-time thing, that it wouldn't happen again, that I was going to end it, fix it, find my way back to who I was before. But then it happened again, and again. And every time, I swore it would be the last. Every time I felt a little less human after. There was one night I told her I couldn't do it anymore, that it had to stop, that we'd made a mistake. She just looked at me and said, "Do you regret feeling wanted?" And I didn't answer because I didn't. That was the problem. I didn't regret how she made me feel. I regretted who was making me feel it. She never asked me to choose. Never talked about love or a future or anything serious. She didn't need to. Her presence was the choice. The way she moved around the house like she already belonged there, like she had nothing to apologize for, made it clear that she wasn't worried about consequences. But I was. I started having nightmares. About my wife finding out. About the family finding out. About this story getting out of my control. I'd wake up in a panic, drenched in sweat, heart racing like I was being chased. I knew I was too deep. I knew I couldn't hide it forever. I became paranoid. Jumping at sounds, deleting messages, checking her door at night to make sure she wasn't coming to mine. I started avoiding even being in the same room with her. She noticed. She asked if I was ashamed of her.
I didn't know what to say.
She nodded like she already knew and said, "You think you're a bad person now. You were already gone before me." That stung. Because she was right. I'd left my marriage emotionally long before she ever touched me. I'd stopped caring. Stopped trying. She just lit the match. The fire had been building for months. And yet, knowing that didn't make it better. It didn't make me less of a liar, less of a coward, less of a hypocrite. The next time she tried to touch me, I pulled away. She stared at me for a long time, then said, "We're just pretending now, huh?" and walked out. That was the last time. She didn't try again. She barely spoke to me. Stayed in her room most of the time, applied for jobs, made plans to leave. The house felt empty, even though we were both in it. When my wife came home that Sunday, she kissed me on the cheek again and asked if anything had happened. I lied. Straight to her face. Said, "Same old." She nodded, dropped her bag, and went to shower. I watched her walk away and realized I couldn't look at her the same anymore. Not because of her. Because of me. Everything felt contaminated.
The bed.
The kitchen. My own body. I touched betrayal, and now everything I loved felt like a crime scene. I kept waiting for the moment it would all fall apart. For Mia to tell someone. For a text to be discovered. For some random crack in a lie to explode. But it didn't happen. Nothing did. That made it worse.
Because now I had to carry it.
Now I had to wake up every day pretending I hadn't destroyed something sacred. I had to sit across from my wife and nod along to her stories like I wasn't replaying everything in my head. I had to smile at family dinners like I didn't deserve to be cut out of every photo. I thought the act itself would be the hardest part. It wasn't. Living after it was. Mia left 2 weeks later. No announcement. No drama. Just a quiet goodbye and a packed bag by the door. She hugged my wife, promised to stay in touch, and smiled like nothing had happened. She didn't look at me until the very last second. When she did, it wasn't anger or regret in her eyes. It was something colder, recognition, like she finally saw me for exactly what I was. And then she was gone. I stood there for a long time after the door shut. My wife was already talking about the dinner she wanted to cook that night, how nice it would be to have the house back to ourselves. I just nodded. Inside, it felt like someone had scraped everything out of me and left the shell standing. I thought her leaving would make things easier, that it would give me room to reset, to recover. But it did the opposite. Without her there was no more distraction, no more confusion to hide behind. It was just me and the weight of what I'd done. Me and the person I'd become. And I hated him. I stopped sleeping well. Couldn't focus at work. Started drinking more. My wife noticed, asked if I was okay. I lied. Said I was stressed. Blamed it on work, on the weather, on anything but the truth. She offered to plan a weekend away, said maybe we just needed time together. I agreed, but I already knew it was too late. Everything she did reminded me of how far I'd fallen. Her laugh used to comfort me. Now it made my stomach turn. Not because it was fake, but because it was real, and I wasn't. I was living in a mask. Smiling when I was supposed to. Touching her out of obligation. Pretending to care about a life I'd already corrupted. Some nights I'd sit in the bathroom with the shower running just to drown out the sound of my thoughts. I'd scroll through my phone, half hoping to see Mia's name. She never reached out. Not once. And that silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. It told me she'd closed the chapter.
Moved on.
Left me in the wreckage alone. Eventually, the guilt turned into something darker. Resentment. I started blaming her in my head. Telling myself she knew what she was doing. That she manipulated me. That she took advantage of a weak moment. But deep down, I knew none of that was true.
She didn't force me.
She didn't lie. I did. I carried it all in silence. There wasn't anyone I could talk to. Not without burning my whole life to the ground. So I wore the mask tighter. Made small talk. Made love. Made promises. I became an expert at pretending. But every now and then, something would crack through. A scent.
A song.
A dream. And I'd be right back in that room with her, feeling everything all over again.
The shame.
The hunger. The confusion. The loss. It was like being haunted by a version of myself I couldn't kill. The worst part wasn't what I lost. It was what I broke. My wife didn't deserve it. She'd done nothing wrong. She had her flaws, sure, but she didn't betray me. She didn't step outside our vows. I did. And I took something from her she'll never even know was stolen. Eventually, she started noticing more. The distance. The way I'd flinch when she touched me. The way I'd go quiet when she brought up family. One night she asked, point blank, if I was cheating. Not with Mia, just in general. I told her no. Looked her in the eyes and lied. She nodded. But I could see it. The doubt had taken root. Something in her shifted after that. She didn't ask again, but she didn't trust me anymore either. I could feel her pulling away, slowly, like someone backing out of a room where the walls were starting to crumble. I thought about confessing, telling her everything, clearing my conscience, letting the chips fall. But it wasn't about fear. It was about control. Once the truth was out, I'd have no say in what happened next. And I wasn't brave enough to risk it. So I stayed quiet. Weeks turned into months. Life moved on. Birthdays, holidays, vacations. We smiled in photos, made jokes with friends. From the outside, we were fine, happy even. But I knew better. I could feel the rot underneath it all. Sometimes I wondered if she could feel it too. If, deep down, she sensed that something sacred had been ruined between us. She never said it, never accused me. But trust is fragile. And once it's cracked, it doesn't matter how many times you tape it back together. It never feels the same in your hands. One afternoon, I got a call from a mutual cousin. Mia was engaged. She'd met someone abroad. An artist. They were planning to move to another country together. He said it like it was just gossip, light conversation. I smiled. Said I was happy for her. Hung up. Then I sat there in the kitchen and stared at nothing for an hour. She was building a new life.
Clean. Separate.
While I was still buried in the one I broke. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't. She didn't make promises. I did. She didn't lie to a spouse. I did. She wasn't the one who had to look in the mirror every day and pretend the reflection was still worthy of love. The worst thing about betrayal isn't being found out. It's knowing you betrayed yourself first. That you became someone you swore you'd never be. That you crossed a line you can never uncross. And you did it with your eyes open. I live with that every day. I never told my wife. We're still together. Some days are better than others. We go on walks, watch shows, make plans for the future. But it's all built on a lie. And that lie sits in my chest like lead.
Heavy. Cold. Permanent.
Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd said no earlier. If I told Mia to stop the first time. If I'd remembered who I was before the loneliness and resentment hollowed me out. But wondering doesn't change anything. It just keeps the wound fresh. I know people think infidelity is about lust, about weakness. But it's not. It's about loneliness. It's about being invisible for so long that when someone finally sees you, you forget the cost of being seen. You forget everything but the feeling of mattering again. And by the time you remember, it's already too late. This isn't a story with a lesson or redemption. I'm not proud. I'm not justified. I'm just still here. Living with the choice. Waking up every day beside someone who deserves more. And wondering if today will be the day it all comes crashing down. And if it does, I won't fight it. Because the truth always catches up. And when it does, I'll finally stop running.